2024, and it is episode 31 of the NHL podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I am joined by Joe Meade. Tonight, Joe and I will go over the big game in football, a couple of other transfer portal coaching stuff, and then we'll get into basketball, a pretty never seen before suspension, and then the big dogs at Purdue go down. So, Joe, before we get into Michigan versus Washington, Ohio State has been in the news mostly for good reasons, and they get their top cornerback, and they get Quinshon Judkins from Ole Miss to be their running back. So you got a new quarterback, a new running back, and you get your top cornerback. Offseason's going pretty well so far for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, Sean, I think it definitely was tumultuous in December with the McCord news. I know a lot of Buckeye fans probably wanted some more appealing quarterback names than Will Howard, but I do think most are pretty satisfied with that, considering that they're also going to have Devin Brown and Aaron Nolan behind him. Uh, that news, I think it broke right after Michigan lifted the trophy, or right before the ceremony. I'm not gonna pretend that wasn't a coincidence. I think Judkins, his exit from Ole Miss was interesting. I think you could make your own opinion about it, like certain old linemen not blocking for him, allegedly certain problems in the locker room, certain demands of their NIL program, which I question because they've been landing an insane amount of high quality transfers like Walter Nolan from Texas A&M. But regardless of that, I don't know how this affects Travion Henderson. You know, Judkins is a guy, he's kind of a workhorse running back. Ole Miss does have a dynamic offense, but his freshman year last year and this year, he was the top running back in the SEC. I don't really want to hear arguments otherwise. You know, maybe top two or three if you're going to really try to undermine him, but this is a huge pickup for the Buckeyes. I don't know what this means. I don't know if they're going to reformat their offense. There's a lot of rumors swirling about the coaching staff. I know they just got rid of their special teams coach today. I doubt they would even think about getting rid of Brian Hartline or Larry Johnson. But, to be determined, Sean. It's stuff still seems to be reshuffling in Columbus. By no means are they done. Technically, Marvin Harrison Jr. hasn't declared for the draft yet. Same with Emeka Egbuka and Travion. But they did get Denzel Burke, their top quarterback. I do think he could have been a first or a day two pick at worst. So I think that's really good for their defense, which, by the way, I thought was probably a top 5 unit in all of college football this year. So all good news there. Probably the only bad part about their week is what we're going to talk about right now. Sean, you want to lead us into it?
Yeah, Joe, why don't we hit on another college football topic first, because I do want to talk about Michigan for a while. A couple hours ago, news came out that Nick Saban is retiring after 17 years at Alabama. Now, that doesn't have a huge impact on the Big Ten, except in the fact that the top candidate at this point seems to be Oregon head coach Dan Lanning, who, as of now, is a coach in the Big Ten. He was on the ESPN coverage during the national championship, and whether they go with him or not, we're sure Alabama will hit the portal. Players will hit the portal. Their new coach is going to hit the portal. So definitely some things to watch out for from the Big Ten. But any thoughts on this?
Yeah, Sean. Just to comment on the Lanning aspect, if you're a real conspiracy theorist, and I know we have some on our podcast, which I do love. I love reading all the messages and hearing all the theories because some of them do come true, whether that's insider info or a guess in the dark. But what I would say is, if he was on the ESPN coverage, here's just, I'm throwing you a bone here. ESPN is going to be the prime network for the SEC. Do with that information what you will. But no, Sean, I've seen like James Franklin pop up in the search, Lane Kiffin, a whole bunch of names. I don't think.
Dabo.
Yeah, Dabo. See, Dabo makes sense because he went to Alabama, and Kiffin, he revitalized his career under Saban. Those are realistic, but like throwing like Franklin in there. I saw one joke post with Harbaugh. Like, come on, what are we doing? I do think, the one interesting person I think that could actually sustain the unrealistic success Saban had. And I mean unrealistic in the sense that to think anyone's going to have the greatest dynasty part two is pretty ridiculous assessment of a job. That's probably the only person that comes to mind is Urban Meyer. but I highly doubt Urban goes back there. And frankly, I don't think Saban would like Urban to have that job. So regardless, really interesting. I do think you're going to see some guys try to maybe get out of their LOI, their letter of intent. Maybe some guys like Domani Jackson in particular, the USC corner who committed there from the portal. Maybe he pulls out. He's had interest in Ohio State and Michigan before. Certainly, they wouldn't say no to Domani Jackson, any team in this conference or in this country. So, uh, this might be something that's a part one for how it affects the Big Ten. Right now, it's really nothing. But if they do steal a Lanning, and maybe they hit the portal aggressively and they steal some Big Ten players, that could be a major storyline going into the 2024 season.
Yeah, remember, 12 teams do make the college football playoff, so it is not out of the question for somebody to go in there and get them there, because there will be a couple three-loss teams most likely playing for the national title. But Joe, we're going to talk about the last 4-team college football playoff, which came to an end on Monday. And your Michigan Wolverines took care of business. They knocked off Washington 34-13. This game went very much like we predicted, Joe. You were more spot on with your prediction, Donovan Edwards having a big game, but we both were, in the same mindset that
We're talking about how on Sunday I predicted Donovan Edwards would have a big game, and boy, did he ever. I don't know what it is with Donovan Edwards. I really can't give any critical analysis of it other than what I've seen, which is in big games, Penn State, Ohio State, Big Ten championship games, and playoff games, he decides to play well. I don't mean decides to play well. I'm sure he's trying every game, but he just goes into a different gear. The analogy I used with him and Corum, I don't know if I mentioned it on this cast before, is I kind of think they're like Jeter and A-Rod. Corum's pretty reliable. He'll always get you 4 to 5 yards. He'll get you the first down when he absolutely needs to. Donovan Edwards, he's been probably the most criticized player this year for Michigan, just because of the explosion you saw last year when Blake went down, particularly the Ohio State game in 2022, and even the Penn State game in 2022. And he showed like 2 flashes of it this year, mainly against Penn State. And he had like the throw of the Ohio State game. He's probably the most exciting player on Michigan's team. I don't think many people would argue with that. But really, all year, he's had probably 2 plays before on Monday that you could really highlight for any kind of like highlight tape. But this game, I really am happy for the guy, not only because I'm a Michigan fan, but because he talked a lot about how he was struggling this year, how he needed to see a therapist. And to see him do that on the biggest stage in college football, go for 2 TDs, 6 carries. I think he averaged like, what was it? He had like 100 and he had like 104, 105 yards. So he averaged like 17.3 a carry. That's pretty insane. Really happy for him. He'll have to decide on his NFL future, as does J.J. McCarthy. But going more into the game, Sean, speaking of J.J., I don't think he played all too well, and I don't mean that as a bad thing. He really did not have to do too much. I think in the first half, it looked like Michigan, when they were up 14-3 and then 17-3, especially at the end of the first quarter, Corum getting tackled within the 30. It looked like Michigan at a score of 14-3 was just going to go up 21-3 and never look back. But to Washington's credit, they made them settle for a field goal. Michigan's offense, one criticism I've always had of this staff is they're a little too conservative in these situations, and not that you have to be in Madden mode, throwing 4 verts or going Hail Mary, but really wasn't doing anything after that drive in the entire first quarter, which allowed Washington to creep back in. I do think going for that 4th down was a little ridiculous, considering that the defense was absolutely lights out, and you gave Washington a short field. But regardless, Sean, in the second half, Early turnover from Will Johnson, who will definitely be coming back next year. Probably will be a top 10 pick in 2025. Gets the early pick, gets Michigan up 20-10. Washington responds to the field goal. From there, it was kind of like the Penn State game, a game of hot potato. JJ had a few runs, but they really could never do anything, never really had any momentum until the last 10 minutes of the game. I know there was the controversial holding call on the 42-yard pass, 42-yard pass to Adunze. That'll be talked about a lot. But regardless, Michigan just does what they always do in these late games, which is take the ball, have one big play, which was the long pass to Colston Loveland. Then Blake Corum, he's as inevitable as Thanos is, scored a TD, and Washington from there was in desperation mode, which is why they threw that pick on that fourth down. Michigan is the first national champions in football in the Big Ten since 2014 when Urban Meyer and Ohio State won it with that great Zeke Elliott, Cardale Jones, Mike Thomas team. And that wraps up the 4-team era shot. It was the 10th college football playoff. Only 2 Big Ten teams in the 10 years won the national title. And really, the amazing part, Sean, is only 3 programs ever made it to that. Michigan, Michigan State, and Ohio State. Ohio State made it 5 times, Michigan 3, and Michigan State once. I do think with 12 teams that a lot more Big Ten teams with the expanded conference will get in. That's a larger conversation for a different podcast. But now, Sean, the story is, and before I turn it right back to you, is the Jim Harbaugh saga. It's been pretty quiet the last 48 hours since the title game. You know, you have your message board and keyboard warriors all across the nation and maybe outside the nation connecting him to whatever job. But I really believe, Sean, I'll make a prediction. I really believe he's on the sidelines next year. And Sean, I'm going to let you comment before I keep going.
Yeah, it's just I thought the game was very similar to the Alabama game. You punch them in the face early, and then I think they tried to play a little bit too safe, and they let Washington back in the game. Washington stacked the box. They made JJ throw it. It took him a couple drives to figure it out. I think they had 4 stops in a row, 3 punts, and the turnover on downs that you already mentioned, Joe. But then he got it going. They got a field goal in the first drive of the second half, and then a couple more punts. But then, you know, you made the Yankees analogy for Corum and Edwards. I think Blake Corum is more like Mariano Rivera than A-Rod. You know,
You mean Jeter.
So Corum was Jeter? Okay.
Corum's Jeter, Donovan's A-Rod. Hence why the fans love Corum and some of the fans don't love Edwards.
Well, yeah, I think Corum, in very Mariano Rivera type fashion, closed this game and put a stamp on it. He ended it. And, you know, they didn't really do that against Alabama. It was a great drive at the end of the game by JJ, but this game was probably over with a couple minutes to go, and that's not really how it looked like it was going to go there for most of the second and third quarter. But, Joe, you know, both these quarterbacks will probably be in the NFL next year if they want. Penix for sure, JJ still up in the air. Both are projected to be first-rounders. I think this game honestly may have hurt both of their draft stocks. Penix for sure. JJ also, you know, made winning plays. He did what he had to, but, you know, he didn't do anything like spectacular. The reason why they won the game was because, you know, they were averaging 19 yards per carry at one point. And obviously now that went down as the game went on, and the defense. But congrats to Michigan, 15-0, and there will be a national championship rematch next year, Joe, at Washington, correct?
Correct. That'll be October 5th. I'd be shocked if that wasn't some sort of primetime game. Whoever has it, Fox, won't be ESPN. That's the only time they'll ever get a Michigan-Washington game again. But Sean, I wanted to cut you off because I have 3 really important things to comment on. The first is right before the shooting of this podcast for a Wednesday night here on the East Coast, Charlie Baker, president of the NCAA, by no means do we endorse him on this podcast, or probably most people in America. Certainly, they might not know him, but they know who the NCAA is, and they certainly have their own feelings about that. Regardless, he did come out in a small press conference, squabble with reporters, saying that Michigan did win the title fair and square. That was a large topic throughout this year, probably the biggest storyline in sports for the middle of November. The side stealing and the alleged stealing with Connor Stallions. However, him saying that kind of, you know, I'm not going to say Michigan's going to get off scot-free. I certainly do think they'll be hit with some sanctions, particularly Harbaugh and maybe some members of the staff. Be shocked to see Connor Stallions on any sideline in a coaching capacity doing anything. However, Sean, I think that kind of alleviates the idea that Michigan's going to get the death penalty or that this is even going to be close to getting vacated. I do think they're outlining laws as we speak to really punish coaches for certain level 1 and 2 violations, which Jim Harbaugh is allegedly guilty of. For what that does for Harbaugh's future, I really don't know because this is still happening as we speak. But given everything that's happened in the past 72 hours, Jim lifting the trophy, Black Monday taking its toll, and really, you know, this is an NFL cast. Mike Vrabel getting fired, you know, that probably takes away another NFL job. You know, he was someone no one thought would get fired, so he probably takes another one. He could have any job in football. For all the Ohio State fans unhappy with Ryan Day, Vrabel is a Buckeye. That is very much a joke. That won't happen. But Sean, the third thing I'll comment on is, you know, the instant stars for Michigan leaving are Blake Corum, Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson, Chris Jenkins. Everyone else on this team on the defense is probably going to come back. Besides, you know, Saberstill too, who I forgot to mention. Sounds like Mason Graham, Will Johnson, Kenneth Grant. They're guaranteed to come back. They can't go to the NFL. And, you know, on offense, the storyline's going to be all about JJ and Donovan Edwards. They've been projected pretty high, mainly JJ, but his stock was hurt, Sean. In the big games this year, he was not called on much to throw the ball. I think he did better running the ball in these big games than throwing the ball. And I do think that was because of an ankle injury he sustained in the Penn State game. He barely practiced the week after, leading into Maryland. So, with all that said, I think the biggest questions Michigan's going to have to answer, it'll be 4 questions. Who's their head coach? Will it be Harbaugh or likely an internal promotion, Sharon Moore? Are JJ and Donovan going to come back? What are these new bylaws going to look like? Are they really going to try to put bylaws in to make sure Harbaugh doesn't coach at all next year or doesn't coach at least half the season? And then the fourth one, Sean, is I'll just put it plainly. We're still in the COVID era of guys who come back for 5th, 6th years. You know, we graduated college last year, and there are still going to be guys in our grade that could still come back to Michigan. So all this nonsense about 44 seniors, I do think Michigan will lose a lot, but I think they're keeping a really good nucleus, especially on the defense. So to say that the Big Ten and Michigan is going to be gone, I would hold on that thought until we find out more.
And like I said earlier, I do think that Jim Harbaugh will think about this, and he's won at his alma mater, and now if he goes to the NFL and he doesn't do well in the first 2 years, he could be out of a job. But he just has to have a good season to make the college football playoff now. Like, that doesn't seem so bad. And, you know, there are 7 vacancies in the NFL as of this recording right now. Obviously, we heard the news of the Seahawks just a couple hours ago, but at the very most, it will go up to 8. The Patriots still haven't made a decision yet about Bill Belichick, but I'm sure Jim will probably have a couple calls with a couple of these teams, but I would think I'd definitely lean towards him staying now, but I wouldn't be surprised. Because if, you know, the NCAA does play hardball and wants him to be suspended for an entire year or something like that, he could more than likely just go to the Chargers or the Commanders or something like that. Reportedly, they're pretty fond of him. But, Joe, I think it's time to turn the page to basketball because there are a couple things to talk about in hoops. So the first thing we're going to talk about, Joe, is a very odd situation. Now, you prefaced this a little bit last time. Dug McDaniel was reportedly about to be academically ineligible for the second semester, which starts on January 16th. Now, that is not the case, but he is suspended for 6 road games because of it. He will continue to play at the Chrysler Center, but not on the road. This is just an unbelievable turn of events in what is unfortunately a pretty bad year for Michigan hoops.
I think pretty bad year for Michigan hoops is probably the nicest compliment you could give their season so far. I think it's been an absolute train wreck of a year. And, we talked about how on Sunday they like switched head coaches. I think that was mainly for Martelli and the Palestra, which I totally understand. But, it's been a season of I've never seen this before. And this is probably the fourth. We had the Jawan, alleged incident, him like fighting Sanderson or not fighting Sanderson. Then we had the follow-up, which is I don't know what his role is here. Sanderson, the strength coach, long beloved under Beeline. We had the rumors of who's head coaching this game at Penn State, and now, and by the way, that happened in football too. With no one knew who the head coach was going to be the Penn State football game either. Just a little Easter egg for our football fans who still listen on. And then the fourth one is what occurred today: 6 games suspended only on the road. It kind of seems like Dug McDaniel's on house arrest, Sean.
Yeah, it was odd, and the rumors had come out probably about a week ago now, and he did not play as many minutes as he usually does in the Penn State road game. And he wasn't playing very well, so you could say it that way, but also you just thought that, okay, maybe this team is preparing a little bit to not have him in the lineup. Now, that's kind of half true because he won't be in the lineup on the road, and it's going to be a very odd situation. Is he going to travel with the team on the road and just not suit up? I don't think so. That's not what it seems like at this point. But he will be there playing at home, which is it's very odd. Not sure how they came to this conclusion or if it's going to help him figure out his academic issues. But just a really interesting situation, and unfortunately it's kind of on brand with how Michigan has rolled this year in basketball.
Yeah, Sean, I'm really worried that our Michigan listeners are going to stop. I'll try to inflate. We always try to inflate as much football into this as humanly possible, but in the offseason, we'll see how capable it is because this season is probably already off the tracks, and now it's just going towards the civilians. That's how, horrible analogy, but really, I have no other way to describe it. Frankly, we actually need to bring Michigan back down to earth. They've had such a good football season. I think their fans are at an all-time high, including me, of arrogance and insufferable meter is probably the highest. But yeah, Sean, let's just stop talking about Michigan. I think our listeners are going to be sick if they hear that word again.
Yeah, Joe, we got just about 9 minutes left. We got a couple of games that we want to talk about here. Sunday night, after we recorded, Northwestern picked up a nice win against Michigan State at home. This was the Malik Hall 0-0-0-0-0 game where he did not register a stat in 25 minutes. Jackson Kohler did come back for 3 minutes, but didn't do much. Mike and I talked about this on Tuesday or Monday, Joe, but this is kind of on brand with Michigan State this year. They laid an egg on the road, and they got beat by a team that is capable of doing so when they're at home.
Yeah, Sean, I'm not going to talk too much about the game because you and Mike did do a really good job covering it. I just want to propose the question again to guys who only listen to this cast. Where do they stand in March Madness? I know you've done a lot of bracketologies now. What's your opinion of them?
It's really odd because, their numbers are great for where they are. They're 9-6 on the year, but they're like a top 25 team by most metrics, and that alone would probably get them in right now if the season ended today. But obviously it doesn't, and I threw them on the bubble. I think for second team out maybe, but it's kind of a we'll see what happens with them type of decision there because they have a huge win against Baylor, nice win against Indiana State. They have some good wins. They still are probably going to finish in the top half of the Big Ten, but they certainly are not as good as people thought or how they probably should be. But you want to turn it over to Northwestern too, because not only did they get the job done against Michigan State, they picked up a road win against Penn State at the Bryce Jordan Center Northwestern 12-3. They certainly seem to be on the path to an NCAA tournament bid.
Sean, not even a path to the NCAA tournament. They could be a really good seed in the tournament. Maybe a 5-6. They've had some really good wins. This Penn State one, and Michigan State and Penn State probably on their resume right now doesn't look all that great. Michigan State's win will probably look better, assuming Michigan State does pull it together, which is the main assumption of this podcast. But going forward for Northwestern, I really think they don't got to worry about bubble watching. I think they got to worry about just climbing the ladder, maybe getting to a 5 or 6 seed. It's not unrealistic at this stage.
Yeah, definitely not. They didn't have a great non-conference, but you got Purdue and you got Michigan State so far. You did get smacked by Illinois, but they're definitely headed towards a top half finish, and that, at the very worst, would be a 7 seed at the worst, maybe 6 seed. I do think, they would kind of have to run the table and be up there by Purdue to get a protected seed, but you could still win a couple games with the 6 or 7. But Joe, they're able to win games without Boo Buie really going nuclear, which is big because you just can't do that every game. Now, to beat Purdue, he needed to do that, but to beat every other team, you made 17 tonight, 19 against Michigan State. Wasn't the leading scorer either night. I think Boo Buie's a great lead guard and a great player, but it's really good news that he doesn't have to have an amazing game for them to have a chance to get a W.
Yeah, Sean, not too much more to add on that. I just think Northwestern. I think if you're a Northwestern fan, I'm just going to advise you, Sean can do the same as an Indiana fan. Don't settle. This season is going really well. I'm not saying to just, lose all your minds if you don't win the conference or you're not a top 4 seed in the Big Ten tournament. But the way they're playing now, they should be treated like a contender. Seriously.
Yeah, we've
in the conference.
We've talked about the top 3 teams in the conference show and that 4th spot being up for grabs. Certainly looks like Northwestern wants it the most so far. And, that does mean a lot, especially for a team not on the bubble to not have to play an extra game is huge. Even if you are playing the 5 seed, the 5 seed's got to play the 12 seed the day before and play again the next day. You have a big advantage there. But, Joe, there were 2 games last night. One we should talk about a lot more than the other. This was the second game on Peacock yesterday. Nebraska ball, they take down Purdue 88-72, in control for most of this one. They get the ball to go in at some key times to stop some Purdue runs, and the fans storm the court in Lincoln. How about this from Fred Hoiberg and co.?
Really happy for Fred Hoiberg. I think he got a lot of criticism. I think he had one of the most unfortunate coaching situations. His first year was the one cut short. He was actually the indication that the college basketball season 2020 would be canceled was him coughing it up on that Wednesday. That's probably Indiana. The most notable Wednesday. Yeah, the most notable Wednesday in Big Ten tournament history was him doing that. Now, to go from that absolutely being terrible the COVID year, next year finishing very bottom of the conference, and then the year they had last year toward February and March into this year, I think this was the climax of it. Seriously, so far.
Yeah, they were 14 for 23 from 3, and for those who are not interested in math, that is one tick down from 61%. That is extremely good, and that will not happen again, probably, but this Nebraska team is good enough offensively to not play ugly like they have over the past couple of years. They've had to really slow it down, and to pick off a win, they'd have to play real slow and half-court it to death, but they don't have to do that this year, which is why they've really gotten things going at home. A couple of really big wins. They did struggle on the road at Wisconsin, but at this point, Joe, Nebraska looks like a tournament team, and they do have a great performance here, but they beat Purdue by 16. That is a big margin for the Boilers.
Yeah, I guess my question to you, Sean, is I'll say this right before I ask the question. Nebraska, they look like they lost control so many times. As a Michigan fan, we've had these big leads, especially even in the Penn State game most recently, and Minnesota. We have these leads. The other team cuts it to 1. Each time Purdue cut it to 1 or within a basket, Nebraska went on an 8-0 run. So that's hat is completely off to Nebraska for that. But Sean, was this more an indication of the of Nebraska, or does Purdue have some things to worry about? What's your take?
I think Purdue has to expect they're expecting different things out of the same players, if that makes sense. Like from a game to game
Yeah.
basis, they are not trying to do the same thing. And for younger guys, like it's a lot easier to just go out there and have the coach ask you to do the same thing. And in the last game against Illinois, it was Kaufman Wren who was running the show when Edie was out. He has no points in 15 minutes today. That's just, and Mason Gillis was in there because he was hitting some threes. Foster Lawyer got benched, only played 21 minutes because he was 3 for 6 from three. I mean, if you're losing, you need to shoot some threes. He's the best 3-point shooter you have. So a couple of puzzling decisions there from Painter, and just maybe trying to define the roles of the players a little bit more. But I don't think they played terrible. I just think Nebraska had the best performance of the season so far, and the 3-point percentage, like I said, won't matter. Purdue, looks a little vulnerable on the road. Their next one is at Assembly Hall, and boy, do the Hoosiers need that one, Joe, because they looked really bad yesterday in a game at the Jersey Mike's Arena. Rutgers takes it 66-57. Indiana misses 11 free throws. They go 4 of 15 from the line. That's 26%. They go 7 of 26 from 3. They have 18 turnovers, and they have their senior point guard ejected early in the second half. Everything goes wrong for the Hoosiers. Rutgers picks up a home win.
Sean, again, I did not watch much of this game, admittedly. Really was only following and, brief highlights. But I guess I would ask you, is this a concerning moment for Indiana where you think the season maybe not goes off the rails, but faces a little slump? Is that your biggest concern as an Indiana fan?
Yeah, the concern is just that the issues were predictable, and they've happened more than a couple times. Now, you actually rebounded okay, and Rutgers ended up plus 11 because you hucked up a bunch of shots at the end of the game, but that was the problem against Ohio State. And they seem to be plugging holes everywhere, right? They fix one thing that was bad the next game, and then something else pops up. And it is concerning because their strengths don't line up. What do they do really well? There's a couple things that they do really well in the country. Number one, free throw rate. Top 20 in the country. 317th in free throw percentage. Doesn't add up. Fifth tallest team in the country per KenPom. 283rd in rebounds. Doesn't add up. So I do think something has to happen because this game was there to be won. Rutgers is not a very good team. They have been over the year. They're a good program. I think we could both respect Rutgers as a program, but you did every single thing wrong yesterday. And you still had a chance to win, and you didn't take it. It's hard to win road games, but when you get opportunities, you got to take them. And at this point, Joe, I don't think either of us would be surprised if Indiana beats anybody at home. But at this point, they do only play 2 of the top 3 teams at home. So if they do win those and lose the rest of the road games, I don't think that'll be enough. You got to see something different. The offense was horrible. I know Rutgers is elite defensively, but yeah, a lot of warning signs, and none of them are really out of nowhere.
Absolutely. Sean, I just to close you out, it's safe to say the next game for them is probably their biggest of the year in terms of, not letting the season go off the rails. Is that fair?
I mean, yeah, you got to beat Minnesota at home. That's on Friday night. And if you can find your way to get a W there, then a whole lot can change with Purdue at home. And
Yeah.
we said it
All
with
I'm saying
Michigan
is,
State. It would be a Michigan State type game against Baylor if Indiana does win against Minnesota and then faces Purdue. Because not everything would be great, but you'd be in a significantly better spot with just one good set of 40 minutes.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say is Minnesota is the season ruiner. They're the boogeyman. They ruined Ohio State's season last year. Ohio State was looking really good last year. certainly had their flaws. After they lost to Minnesota, their season completely went off the rails. Minnesota beat Michigan last Thursday, and since then, Michigan's season is going has got even more off the rails. It was already going down, and Minnesota just probably just buried them in the coffin. So, uh, yeah, Sean, don't lose that game. That's my message.
They are only favored, per the analytics, Joe, to win 2 more games this year. That'll
That's
be on
crazy.
Friday and the Penn State home game, whenever that is. Now, I do think they'll win more games than that because they have a great crowd. But I don't think this team would be favored against many on the road this year in Division One because they do not do things well that good teams that win games on the road do well. And now this is the time of the year, Joe, where we're seeing a lot of home teams win games. I think at the Big Ten it's 29-6. Before tonight, I know obviously Penn State picked up a road or Northwestern picked up a road win today. It is hard to win on the road, uh, which is why you're seeing Iowa State taking down Houston yesterday, UCF just taking down Kansas as we were recording. Um, there's a reason why get teams on a lot of film and students get back from camp, get back from break. You have some spirited efforts, but that makes winning home games even more important. But Joe, I think we'll wrap it up there. And thank you for tuning in to this episode of In a Nutshell. Not sure when we'll see you next. Probably early next week. And